Welcome to EconWorks. We live in an era of massive platforms, global supply chains, and unprecedented market concentration. But behind every headline about a merger or a legal settlement, there is a deeper mechanical struggle for control. On this show, we pull back the curtain on the invisible forces shaping our economy. We look past the talking points to examine where law, power, and markets actually collide, and how those collisions redefine the world we live in. Coming to you from the EconWorks desk, we're diving into a breakdown of the systems that run our modern life. This is EconWorks. Today's episode, from platform conduct to competitive outcomes.
So imagine you're in your garage, and you actually managed to build a fundamentally superior search engine.
Okay, a tall order, but let's go with it.
Right. Or, maybe a revolutionary new messaging app. And it's faster, perfectly respects user privacy. It is objectively just a better product.
It's a developer's dream.
Exactly. But then you realize your biggest competitor literally owns the glass screen that the user is looking at. They own the operating system, they own the default settings.
They own the entire environment.
Right. And today we are really digging into why U.S. antitrust enforcers are sort of waking up to this reality. In the digital age, a monopoly doesn't necessarily just raise your prices. It effectively rewrites your reality.
It really does. And I mean, that tension, right? The tension between building a better product and controlling the actual environment where those products live, that is arguably the defining economic conflict of our time.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we are so accustomed to the old consumer welfare standard.
Yeah.
The whole idea that, well, if prices are low, then the market must be healthy.
Sure, yeah.
But when the products dominating your daily life are ostensibly free, how do you even measure the harm?
And that is the exact puzzle we are exploring in today's deep dive. We've got this really dense, incredibly insightful piece of source material in front of us today.
It's a great read.
It really is. It's an article from the EconWorks Substack. Specifically, it's part 6 of their FAANG antitrust series, and it's titled From Platform Conduct to Competitive Outcomes,
which is scheduled for an April 20 publication, I believe?
Yes, exactly. And our mission today is to essentially map out how enforcement is just radically changing its approach to big tech based on these emerging economic frameworks.
It's a massive pivot.
Okay, let's unpack this. Yeah. Because for a century, the rules of the game seemed entirely focused on the receipt at the checkout counter.
They totally were. The traditional framework of antitrust, it was built for railroads and oil barons.
Right, the standard oil days.
Exactly.
Right.
A company achieves massive scale, they crush their rivals, and then they artificially inflate the price for the consumer.
Because they can.
Right. And the harm was always quantifiable with a dollar sign. If you were paying, say, 50% more for steel because of a cartel, well, that was a clear violation.
It's easy math.
Super easy math.
Yeah.
But as the EconWorks analysis points out, enforcers are completely pivoting now. They're entering an era where market power is defined by something the source calls platform ecosystem governance.
Governance. That word choice is very intentional, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like the function of a nation state, not, a software developer in Silicon Valley.
But it is honestly the most accurate way to describe their role now. These massive tech platforms, they've completely transcended mere market participation.
Yeah.
They aren't just selling a good or a service anymore. They are literally dictating the fundamental rules of trade.
Wow.
They're acting as governors for users, for developers, and for millions of independent businesses whose entire existence honestly relies on accessing that platform's infrastructure.
So let's contextualize that shift for a second. The source notes that recent complaints against these tech giants, they don't primarily allege direct price increases.
No, they don't.
Because, as you said, you don't pay a monthly subscription fee to run a Google search or to scroll through a Meta social feed.
Right, you're paying with attention, not cash.
Exactly. So what are enforcers heavily scrutinizing then? The piece talks a lot about these non-price competitive channels.
Yes, exactly. The enforcers are essentially looking at the invisible costs. They are measuring how platform operators actively limit meaningful alternatives for you.
Like what choices you actually have.
Right. They're evaluating how specific behaviors slow down the velocity of innovation across the entire tech sector.
Which is huge.
It's massive.
Yeah.
And they're looking at a calculated reduction in interoperability.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning the deliberate friction they introduce when different systems try to talk to each other. like making it annoying to use a third-party smartwatch with your phone.
Oh, yeah, we've all felt that.
And finally, they're analyzing how sheer platform dominance negatively impacts baseline privacy protections for everyone.
You know, it's interesting. The source also makes a very specific point to include Microsoft in this central analysis, even though, strictly speaking, they aren't formally part of that FAANG acronym.
Yeah, that's a crucial inclusion.
It is, and it makes perfect sense because it's not just about, trendy social media platforms. It is about the foundational operating systems that literally serve as the bedrock of our digital lives.
Absolutely.
So to sort of visualize the shift from price to governance, think about the old toll booth analogy, right?
Okay, lay it out.
So the traditional antitrust enforcer would look at a highway toll booth charging like $50, declare that price abusive, and break up the monopoly.
Right. But what's fascinating here is how that highway analogy needs to be completely updated for the digital economy.
How so?
Because market power today, it doesn't come from charging a massive toll. It derives from owning the highway itself
Ah, I see.
and deciding where the exit ramps are even permitted to go.
Precisely. It's about the platform deciding which billboards you are algorithmically allowed to see while you drive down that highway,
Yes.
and whether a competing business is even allowed to construct a storefront off the exit. They aren't just taking your money, they are the intermediate architects of your choices.
And because they sit squarely between you and the developer who wants to offer you a service,
Right.
or the creator who wants to show you a video, they basically govern the very physics of that interaction.
Okay, let's move from the abstract to the mechanical here. Because since these companies aren't just raising the toll, we need to examine exactly how they are flexing this governance power.
The actual tactics.
Exactly. And the EconWorks piece, it maps out the specific arsenal of platform conduct in a couple of really highly detailed visual diagrams.
Figures 1 and 2 in the piece, yeah.
Yeah. But instead of just kind of walking through a dry list of companies, let's look at the actual strategies they use. It seems like they fall into two main categories.
That's right.
You have those who govern access and those who govern attention and demand.
That is a very, very useful way to segment the ecosystem. Let's look at access control first, because Apple and Microsoft are just prime examples here.
Right, the operating systems.
Exactly. The source highlights Apple's App Store governance and Microsoft's OS integration. And in both cases, the platform owns the underlying hardware or the dominant operating system.
Which means they completely control the gateway.
100%.
With Apple, by maintaining this really strict governance over the only authorized method to install software on an iPhone, they directly control market entry and pricing.
They are the ultimate gatekeeper.
Yeah, they decide who is even allowed on the device. And their fee structures, that famous 30% cut, that dictates the baseline economics for developers.
Right. And then with Microsoft, the mechanism's a bit different. It's about baking new tools directly into Windows itself.
Like Edge or Teams.
Exactly. If a new browser or a video conferencing tool is integrated right at the OS level, they fundamentally manipulate what the source calls adoption dynamics.
Because it's just already there.
Right. The friction required for a user to actively seek out, download, and configure a competing browser, it acts as a massive economic moat.
So compare that access control to the second category, steering attention and demand. This is really where Google, Amazon, and Meta operate.
The attention merchants.
Right. They aren't necessarily stopping you from downloading an app. They are actively managing what you see and what you desire.
Yes.
Like Google utilizes default placement to steer user behavior. They pay, billions of dollars to Apple?
Tens of billions, yeah.
Tens of billions to ensure their search engine is the frictionless default on mobile devices. And by doing that, they capture the vast majority of search volume before a user even forms an active choice.
And then you have Amazon relying on marketplace ranking to dictate demand allocation.
Of the search results page.
Exactly. When you search for a generic product, say a charging cable, the algorithm determines the visibility of literally thousands of sellers.
Yeah.
That mechanism of ranking is literally routing customer demand.
And then you have Meta using feed curation to govern attention allocation.
Right. What shows up on your timeline.
Right. Their algorithms determine the weighting of posts and ads, functionally deciding where human attention and therefore ad revenue flows on just a massive scale.
It's incredible power.
But here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because as a user, I kind of have to play devil's advocate here.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I search for a charging cable on Amazon, They have to rank those results somehow, right?
They do.
Giving me a randomized, uncurated list of 10,000 cables is a terrible user experience.
It would be unusable.
Exactly, and the same goes for Meta. An uncurated, strictly chronological fire hose of content from thousands of connections is just chaotic noise.
Totally overwhelming.
So at what point does basic, necessary product design suddenly cross the threshold into anti-competitive action? Because ranking and curating, that's literally the core utility we rely on them for.
You've hit on the most critical defense the platforms offer. And it is the exact tension modern enforcers are wrestling with right now.
Because it's a fine line.
It's a very fine line. You are completely right that curation is essential. But the source addresses this by looking beyond the mere act of sorting itself and focusing really heavily on the underlying incentives.
The motivation behind the math.
Exactly. Curation crosses the line into anti-competitive conduct when platform-level governance over access or defaults dictates which developers can reach users and under what conditions.
Okay.
Ultimately, it's about allocating demand away from competitors and toward the platform's own proprietary services.
Okay, so it really comes down to self-preferencing.
Yes.
It's the platform putting its own thumb on the scale.
That is the core allegation.
Right.
I mean, it is one thing to rank charging cables based on organic user reviews, shipping speed, and price.
Fair competition.
Right. It is another economic reality entirely if the platform operator utilizes its governance power to consistently elevate its own private label cables.
The Amazon Basics stuff.
Exactly. Elevating them, regardless of qualitative metrics, while simultaneously algorithmically burying third-party sellers, who, by the way, are paying for access to the platform.
Right, they're paying ads just to be seen.
Right. When the referee of the marketplace is simultaneously the most powerful player in the game.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
And the referee possesses the ability to quietly rewrite the rules of visibility. That is when product design becomes a massive antitrust vulnerability.
But I want to press you on that a little bit because who gets to definitively define self-preferencing?
It's tough.
Right, like if Apple designs a weather app or a fitness tracker that functions flawlessly with the Apple Watch because they have deep systemic access to their own hardware, isn't penalizing them just punishing them for building a highly cohesive, high-quality ecosystem?
You are touching on what's called the efficiency defense. And it is heavily, heavily debated in antitrust circles.
I bet.
The enforcer's counterargument is that integration itself is fine, but leveraging platform dominance to artificially starve competitors of oxygen is not.
Starving them of oxygen.
Yeah. If Apple makes a great weather app, fantastic. But if Apple simultaneously utilizes its App Store governance to restrict a competing weather app from accessing those exact same underlying hardware APIs.
So they handicap the competitor.
Exactly. Or if they mandate exorbitant fees that make the competitor's business model literally unviable, they are no longer winning on the merits of their weather app.
Yeah.
They're winning because they own the stadium and they locked the competitor in the locker room.
That distinction makes a lot of sense. The harm isn't in building a good product. It's in leveraging infrastructure dominance to prevent anyone else from matching it.
Precisely.
And the EconWorks Substack goes super deep into why this is so dangerous over time. It's not just, a one-off instance of a platform putting its thumb on the scale. The real crisis lies in how these tactics actually compound.
Yes, the source refers to this compounding effect as dynamic effects. They model it in their diagrams as feedback loop dynamics.
Feedback loop dynamics.
Right. And this is essentially the engine of modern digital monopolies. It's this continuous, self-reinforcing cycle that creates structural barriers to entry that are almost mathematically impossible for a newcomer to overcome.
Mathematically impossible.
We really should trace the anatomy of this loop because it explains why the moat is so insurmountable.
Okay, let's do it. So the cycle starts with the mechanism we just discussed, default placement.
Right.
A platform ensures its proprietary service is the pre-installed default. And behavioral economics tells us that default bias is just one of the most powerful forces in consumer behavior.
Oh, without a doubt, people are lazy.
Exactly. The vast majority of users will simply accept the path of least resistance. Even a tiny, tiny amount of user interface friction, like having to navigate to a settings menu to change a default browser, that will deter a massive percentage of the user base.
It really will. And that default status directly drives the second phase of the loop, massive guaranteed usage.
Because everyone just uses what's there.
Exactly. And in the digital economy, usage is the raw material for the third phase, which is data generation.
Ah, the data.
Right. Every single interaction, every search query, every micro-hesitation before a click, it's all captured.
Which feeds the fourth phase, performance.
Yes.
Because they take that absolute ocean of data and they train their machine learning models on it. The algorithms just get hyper accurate at predicting user intent, optimizing routing, or surfacing relevant content.
And that superior performance leads straight into the final phase. Reinforced usage.
The loop closes.
Exactly. The product becomes objectively better, not necessarily because the underlying code was inherently more innovative than some startup's code, but simply because it had a massive data advantage.
So it's default drives usage, usage generates data, data improves performance, and performance reinforces usage.
You got it.
It operates exactly like compound interest in a financial market, doesn't it?
It really does.
Or, honestly, perhaps more accurately, like a neural pathway in the brain.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Like the pathway that gets fired the most thickens and becomes the fastest, most efficient route, while the alternative pathways just atrophy.
That's a perfect analogy.
Because a startup could build a search engine in their garage with a fundamentally more elegant architecture. But without the billions of daily queries feeding its algorithmic neural pathway, it can just never achieve the localized accuracy of the incumbent. The data moat is just too wide.
Oh, if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
you really start to see why this transcends individual company grievances and becomes a major macroeconomic issue.
Yeah.
These feedback loops, they don't just disadvantage a specific rival here or there. They fundamentally warp the entry decisions of the entire market.
And this is exactly where I really want to bring in the technical appendix from the EconWorks piece.
Oh, the appendix is fascinating.
It is, because
Yeah.
the source doesn't just theorize about this stuff. They actually offer a formal economic model quantifying the dampening effect on a startup's motivation to innovate. They map out the literal variables of market entry.
It's a really crucial addition for understanding the structural harm here. The formal model analyzes the cost of customer acquisition versus the lifetime value of that customer.
They're the unit economics.
Right. When an incumbent platform leverages default placement, their cost of acquisition drops effectively to zero.
Because they own the phone.
Exactly. A new entrant, however, has to spend massive amounts of venture capital just to overcome the friction of the incumbent's ecosystem governance.
Just to get someone to tap download?
Exactly.
And the math in the appendix shows that as the incumbent's data advantage compounds, the expected return on investment for the new entrant basically approaches zero.
It plummets.
Right. So if you are a venture capitalist looking at this ecosystem, are you really going to deploy $50 million to fund a startup that has to compete against an entrenched default app with a 10-year data advantage and zero acquisition costs?
No way.
Right. The rational economic choice is to deploy that capital somewhere else entirely.
And that right there is the invisible harm to you, the listener. The antitrust enforcers are essentially arguing that these feedback loops are preemptively killing the next generation of technology.
The stuff we'll never get to see.
Exactly. The threat isn't that your current tools will suddenly cost $20 a month. The threat is the total absence of innovation.
Wow.
It's the revolutionary privacy-focused browser or the localized marketplace that just never gets funded, never gets built or distributed because the structural barriers erected by platform governance are just too high.
But we do have to look at the other side of the ledger here.
Fair enough.
Because, I mean, these platforms are not just cartoon villains twirling their mustaches.
Sure, Ron.
They have a genuinely compelling, structurally sound defense for maintaining these walled gardens. They aren't just saying they want to maintain a monopoly, you know. They argue that this tight ecosystem governance is specifically engineered to protect the user.
They do. And it is a really robust defense that the source details thoroughly. Critics of this new, aggressive antitrust approach argue that strict platform control actually generates immense consumer welfare.
Right.
The source breaks this down into three primary pillars. They say it significantly improves security, it maintains platform integrity, and it guarantees product quality.
So let's use the Apple ecosystem as the prime example here because they lean really heavily into this defense.
They do.
They tightly govern the App Store, they strictly dictate hardware interoperability, and they fiercely guard third-party access to their core systems.
Yep.
And their argument is that this level of authoritarian governance is the precise reason iPhones are not overrun with the kind of malware that historically plagued, more open operating systems. They actively curate the garden to ensure the environment remains safe.
Furthermore, they argue it enables totally seamless integration.
Oh, the ecosystem magic.
Right. When you buy a smartwatch, a tablet, and a laptop from the exact same ecosystem, the reason they communicate with zero configuration, the reason your clipboard syncs across devices instantaneously.
Which is amazing, honestly.
It is. But it's because the platform maintains absolute top-down governance over the protocols. Opening up that ecosystem to decentralized, third-party governance inevitably introduces friction, bugs, and massive security vulnerabilities.
Which perfectly articulates the dilemma for the listener here. As a user, you deeply value that convenience.
Of course.
You want your devices to sync effortlessly. You completely rely on the platform to filter out malicious software so you don't have to be a cybersecurity expert just to, download a calculator app.
Right. Nobody wants that burden.
Exactly. But simultaneously, you don't want to be locked in a digital ecosystem where developers you rely on are being extorted by arbitrary fee changes, or where a platform can just unilaterally kill a competing service just to protect its own margins. We are essentially searching for the exact boundary line between a beautifully curated, pristine walled garden and a luxurious digital prison.
This raises an important question, and it represents the absolute frontier of modern legal and economic theory.
How so?
Well, how do courts actually weigh these fundamentally asymmetrical concepts against each other?
Oh, I see.
Right. Under the old framework, you just compared the current price to the historical price. Easy. Now, a judge has to evaluate competing claims using entirely new analytical frameworks.
It sounds incredibly difficult. I mean, how do you even quantify the theoretical value of a startup's lost innovation against the highly visible immediate value of enhanced data security for a billion users?
You literally have to build new tools of measurement. As the source highlights, you need frameworks capable of assessing competitive effects way beyond pricing outcomes.
Right.
Economists are basically having to model the value of privacy, the velocity of technological advancement, and the long-term impact of reduced interoperability.
That's a lot of variables.
It is. It requires a systemic understanding of how data flows and how attention is monetized, which is radically different from measuring the output of a steel mill.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today, really transitioning from the era of standard monopolies focused on price tags to these invisible governance structures managing our digital reality.
A huge shift.
I think the most vital takeaway for you, the listener, is the realization that these mechanisms, the default settings on your devices, the algorithmic ranking of your search result, the algorithmic throttling of certain links in your feed, these aren't just neutral lines of code.
No, they're not.
They're active, powerful economic policies.
They are the architecture of modern commerce and communication.
Exactly. They are dictating the visibility of information, the viability of independent businesses, and ultimately the tools you adopt in your daily life. The shift in antitrust enforcement is really a recognition that whoever writes the code writes the law.
I think there's a final sort of lingering concept we need to leave the listener with today. It builds directly on the source's exploration of platform power, but it takes it to its logical, perhaps slightly uncomfortable conclusion.
Let's hear it.
If we accept the premise established by EconWorks, that market power is now fundamentally about ecosystem governance rather than just massive market share.
Right.
And if we acknowledge that these platforms are effectively functioning as digital governments, establishing the rules of trade, enforcing behavioral norms, and controlling the distribution of software for billions of citizens worldwide,
Yeah.
should future regulatory frameworks stop treating them like traditional competitive businesses altogether?
Wow. That is a massive paradigm shift.
Consider the physical world, right? We do not treat the entity that manages the municipal water supply or the electrical grid as a standard competitive enterprise.
No, we don't.
We regulate them as public utilities with really strict oversight regarding access, neutrality, and pricing.
Because you literally need them to live.
Exactly, because their infrastructure is too essential to society to be governed purely by private profit motives. So, if a handful of tech platforms now unilaterally govern the fundamental infrastructure of the 21st century digital economy, is it time we start regulating them more like public utilities?
That is a fascinating thought to mull over. The next time you're cruising down the digital highway, taking the exit ramp perfectly curated for your interests and clicking buy on the product ranked #1, ask yourself who built the road, who painted the lane markers, and whether they own all the stores at the exit. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of EconWorks, The goal of this series is to move beyond the surface-level descriptions of how markets work and start looking at the actual architecture of competition. We'll be back soon with another look at where the law and economics meet the market. For the full technical analysis and more from this series, visit us at econworks.com. If you found today's breakdown valuable, please subscribe and share the show. It helps us keep the analysis independent. From all of us here at EconWorks, thanks for listening.